Hello and welcome back to Enemy Assembly. In today's episode, we are looking at these enemies that are trying to get me right now, the ghosts. I'm really happy with how these guys turned out. They're a little bit different in a few ways from previous enemies, which I'll get into those differences, but it's also pretty self-evident just by watching them move around. Now, one of the things that was fun about these guys is that they're actually, compared to some of the previous enemies, they were actually really simple to make. Alright, so, aesthetically, the ghosts, obviously, are transparent, and we will talk about that in a minute because that's probably the most interesting thing about them aesthetically. But first, I just want to talk about their animations. They only have two animations. They have their animation that you're seeing right now, their flying around animation, which does most of the heavy lifting for them. They're sort of silently screaming at you with their glowing green mouth and eyes as they repeatedly claw at you, and their cape and their hair is all flowy, and I had a lot of fun animating these guys. There's something about these fluid, ghost-like enemies wearing just these like ragged robes. I could really make something really fast that still looked pretty good because I didn't have to actually stress too hard about keeping the proportions totally accurate or anything like that. And it ended up producing something that I think is really fun and cool looking. The other animation that they have, of course, I missed, is their knockback slash getting hit animation. I probably need to come up with a more concise word to describe what that animation is. And you can't really see when the moon is behind them, but yeah, it's quite simple. They basically just, let me get my arrow back. They basically just yeah, open their mouth really wide and spread their arms open, and I like it as usual. Now I'm going to take a bit of a detour and talk about their mechanics. Their movement is really straightforward, but of course they move a bit differently than any of the other enemies we've seen, and they also can obviously pass through obstacles. So the nice thing about that is, because they can pass through obstacles, really the only thing that they need to worry about is getting to you so that they can hurt you on contact. This means that they don't need any pathfinding, or at least no complicated pathfinding. All that they're doing is basically angling towards you and then trying to accelerate towards you. But because they have a bit of a slow turn rate and a slow acceleration, that gives them this very floaty and sort of slidey sort of movement behavior, which I felt just like really felt right for the ghost aesthetic. It also means it's possible to fairly easily kite them around and jump over them while they're like trying to reposition themselves to get towards you, which is good to make up for the fact that they can pass through all obstacles, so you actually are not ever really safe from them. When you combine that with the fact that, like other flying enemies, they have swarm mechanics where if they're overlapping, they'll actually change their angle to separate from each other. It means that when you're fighting a group of them, they're still a little bit difficult to navigate around. But because they can't turn or accelerate really fast, if you can see the general direction they're heading, you can still avoid them fairly easily. And of course, if you use your dodge, you can dodge straight through any enemies in this game. So what I think makes these ghosts actually feel like ghosts is their ghostly, glowy, transparent aesthetic. How I did that is actually pretty simple in Game Maker. I just turned on additive blending, but I thought it would be interesting to give a really quick explanation of what that is, sort of how it works, without getting too bogged down in all the details, and how that's different from normal blending. So everything in the game normally is using normal blending. That makes sense. And I'm going to toggle normal blending onto these ghosts so that you can see what they would look like. This is what the ghosts actually look like. That's what their sprites actually look like. Now, in order to explain how additive blending works, I'm going to give you a very simplified version of my understanding of how colors are actually handled by the computer in Game Maker. Essentially, each color has a numerical value associated with it. Lower numbers are darker, higher numbers are brighter. There's a maximum number that is white, and the minimum, 0, is black. When you draw a sprite in the game using normal blending, it just draws the color based on whatever the value for that color is. So it just is very straightforward. It draws the color as it is. With additive blending, which I'm just going to turn on right now, the color of the sprite is added to the color below it. And what that means mathematically is the value that is associated with the color of the sprite is added to the numerical value of the color beneath it. By adding those values together, you of course get a larger value, a larger number. And as established earlier, larger numbers are brighter colors. So what's interesting about this is these ghosts, as you can see, when they're over top of the black background, if I toggle this thing rapidly on and off, switching between additive blending and normal blending, they look exactly the same over top of the black background, because when additive blending is on, you get the sprite color plus the background color, which is 0 because it's black, meaning it's exactly the same as just the basic sprite color. When the ghost is over top of anything else, any value that's not 0, you get a slightly brighter color because the value of the two colors are being added together. This is also why when additive blending is turned on and ghosts are over top of each other, that overlap actually gets even brighter. Now, there is one downside to this. In a game where the main character is constantly placed in front of this really bright moon, that means that the ghosts basically become invisible when they pass over that, because when they're doing additive blending on top of white, which is already as bright as it can be, the ghosts become white. But of course, you might be watching this and saying, well, they don't actually become invisible. I can still see them, and that's because of these outlines. This is what the ghosts looked like when they have additive blending, but no outline. Pretty challenging to see when they're up against the moon. So here we have a ghost in the second level, the Baleful City. This is the environment where you'll actually encounter them in the finished game. And you can see the dark outline that I'm talking about. It doesn't really show up very clearly when the background is actually dark, but if I happen to jump up here, it's still useful for seeing where the ghost is. Alright, so now we are in a room with armored enemies, and it may be a little bit hard to tell, but actually these ghosts use the exact same outline sprite for their armored outline. So rather than having a dark outline with a red outline outlining that outline, which would be, in my opinion, a little bit excessive, it actually just uses the exact same outline. So when they are armored, they have this red, and then if you deal enough damage to get rid of that, they switch to their normal outline. And I think that works pretty well. So there you have it, the ghosts in Dark Moon. I'm pretty happy with how they look. I'm happy with how they play. They're not that complicated, but they are pretty cool to look at, pretty interesting, despite being simple. And I hope you had a good time watching this video. If you did, please subscribe, like the video, comment, etc. I really appreciate it. And next time, we are going to be looking at the final enemy that I've designed so far as of the filming of this video. Not the final enemy that will be in the game, but the final one that I've made so far. And that is also the final enemy of the Baleful City, the second area of the game. And those are the soldiers. Spear-throwing skeleton soldiers. Maybe they're demons. They were supposed to be skeletons, but then I made them and they look kind of like demon warrior guys. So, I don't know. I haven't decided on the lore yet, but yeah. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I hope you have a great day.